Anybody, by the way, does anybody know who Howard Lyman is? Besides, that's a great author and such. Do you remember when Oprah Winfrey on her show said, "I will never eat another hamburger"? Mm-hmm. Okay. Howard Lyman was the guy sitting on stage being interviewed by her when she got into that whole battle with Texas cattle ranchers. So I figured if he, as a third-generation cattle rancher from Montana, could do this vegan thing, so could I. And it was folks, like I said, like he and Dr. Andrew Weil, who really got me thinking differently. And at the same time, I was running ultramarathons and going on these crazy long runs, trying to figure out, should I drink olive oil on the run? Is that a good source? Because it was such a great source of energy and great food, according to Dr. Andrew Weil. By the way, that's not a good source when you're running. You've read my book, you know how that ends. But it really dawned on me that I needed to think of my body really as a race car. And it is something, whether you're an athlete or you're somebody who just wants to stay healthy throughout life, you have to think of your body as a race car. And what would you put into that race car? You're probably not going to put unleaded fuel that you can get at the gas pump down at your local convenience store. You need to think that you're going to be putting high-grade octane fuel in it. And I once heard a physician say that you definitely can eat poorly and sustain life. There's no doubt about it. People live at least until their 50s, 60s, 70s, eating a lot of junk, really low-grade octane fuel. But if you want to sustain health and be healthy along the way, you really have to start thinking about putting higher-grade fuel into your body. And it's really critical. And again, I've seen a lot of disease in hospitals, working with patients, as well as seeing my mother struggle and those that have chronic diseases. And it's really kind of shocking what we still feed patients in hospitals. And I know you guys in Cleveland are changing that with some of the best healthcare in the world here, and some of the best physicians who are trying to get that change. But for the most part, around the country, that's not happening. So when we think of high octane fuel, I want to kind of get into what happens. Because when I switched over, again, I was a meat and potatoes hunting and fishing boy from northern Minnesota. The first thing I had to do was take responsibility. And by that, I meant I had to get out there and cook my own food. Anybody been to northern Minnesota and tried to find a natural food store or try to find a vegetarian or vegan restaurant? It's changing, okay? Maybe it's changed since 20 years ago, but in general, it's not going to happen. You have to, or I had to, figure out a way of taking that responsibility on and learning about foods. So that's one of the first benefits you get out of changing the grade of fuel that you're putting into your body. I think another big benefit, too, is the longevity. How many of us want to be moving our bodies on our own will and in a way that doesn't hurt and feels good into our 80s, 90s, hopefully longer? Most of the people in this room. And that's how I felt, too. It'd be great if I could win ultramarathons on this diet, but it was really about the long-term benefits. What's it going to be like when I get 50, 60, 70, 80, or even in my 40s and 50s? By the way, I just turned 40 this year. And it's one of those things you got to think about in life. And it can start at a young, early age. That's why all of you parents out there, it's so critical to educate your children and be a good influence for them right off the bat. There's a big satisfaction component, too. When you go to changing your fuel and to changing your diet, you feel better about yourself. How many of you have felt better just eating a meal, and whether it's it's all placebo effect and eat one of those good meals that they have across the way, or whether you actually think it's changing instantaneously, there's a big difference in how you think and how you feel after changing the fuel that you eat. So I think that satisfaction component, you come away from it just even more mentally positive. The big issue too nowadays, if you don't read labels and if you don't ask folks at restaurants what they're putting into their food, you probably have no idea what's going into your body. And I think that's probably one of the biggest things that I started noticing is as I became a vegan, I had to be more conscious, and I think that's a really big benefit. You have to start paying attention not only to food labels, but where you eat and what happens. And as an athlete, that's a huge advantage. Because when you're an athlete, you start taking notice of what you're putting into your body. That's the first step. Well, there's many grades of high-octane fuel. And by that, I mean there's a lot of diets. Do we have any paleo folks in the crowd, by the way? Where'd they all go? So they just don't want to admit it. But I actually am a very welcoming individual. I think there's a lot of debates out there, and everybody's got the new diet that's the best diet for the human race, and it's going to solve all the problems. We see them come and go all the time. And the one thing about the plant-based diet, it's stuck around. Granted, we keep learning more and more about the plant-based diet, thankfully, to research and to physicians and health professionals who are forcing the issue. But in general, there's a lot of confusion out there. A lot of people wonder, like, what is the best diet? And I try to take a really, basically welcoming approach. If somebody had told me, Scott, you got to go vegan when I was a hunting and fishing guy in Minnesota, I'd be like, no way, you're crazy, don't even talk to me. But it's really neat to see now there's a big transformation occurring. People are more open to it. So as much as those of you who have paleo friends, they're actually closer to vegans than you think because they eliminate a lot of the junk food. They're improving the whole foods and the natural foods in their diet. So I think there's a lot of overlap in most diets. There's a few, obviously, bigger issues with some of those diets. But the major thing is, the biggest thing you get from a plant-based diet is you start eliminating the junk. And you start improving the high-octane fat that you're putting more whole foods and less processed food. Most of these diets, too, even paleo diets, they incorporate fruits and veggies. This one, of course, they don't. Whole grains and legumes. But if you look around the world, traditionally, people whether you go from Africa, Asia, South America, North America, the staple a lot of times as we became more gatherers and growers and agriculturists, we included a lot of whole grains and legumes, partly because it's an easy energy source and one that's pretty reliable to grow. The other thing, too, is that most of the times you look at these cultures that incorporate a lot of plant-based foods, they are some of the longest-lived individuals. And maybe they eat meat occasionally, maybe they have some eggs or some protein sources that are animal-based, but in general, they incorporate a lot of whole fruits, vegetables, grains, and legumes. So despite, again, the paleo diet or any fad diet that's out there, the big one is that the whole foods, fruits, veggies, are pretty consistent. And I think there's a reason for that. Just eating meat alone is not going to sustain you as an athlete or somebody who just wants to sustain health. So for my diet, I try to just sum it up in 4 simple words. It's simple, doesn't need to be complex. I love to cook, but a lot of you in the audience may not like to cook. You want something quick and easy. Well, the greatest thing about eating a whole plant food diet is that it should be simple. It should also be whole food based. And by that I don't mean Whole Foods, the grocery store. It doesn't have to be Whole Foods. Just whole food, meaning like it's just unadulterated natural food. Okay? Food in its natural state. Or very minimally processed in terms of cooking it. Things like tofu, tempeh. Those are all great sources. Even though they're slightly processed, they're traditional whole foods. I used to be one of those guys that just shook my head when I first had people encouraging me to buy organic food. I was just like, what? You want me to buy apples that are twice as expensive? Just made no sense to me. I was one of those individuals. It's like, I'm not going to pay twice as much. But I gradually changed over because I realized I'm buying better quality food, and it's actually cheap health insurance. You're getting, again, less pesticides, less junk in your food. Regardless, it's funny, they like to debate it a lot, but in general, you just have to look at more of the science, and it's true. The less pesticides do occur in organic foods. And I know we're seeing that shift in just the supermarkets, in grocery chain stores, even like Costco is putting more and more organic foods on shelves. And there's a reason people are demanding it. All of you are changing that climate. And again, of course, plant-based. So how do you refuel? Now I'm going to get into the practical thing, because everybody wants to know. We probably have a lot of speakers here today talking about the benefits of a plant-based diet, but how do you do it? And I'm going to specifically try to sum it up really easy for you guys. How do you put the right fuel from the pump? Because, of course, there's a lot of choices out there. So how do we pick the right fuel? And, of course, the right fueling stations. So I use a couple of analogies here. How many of you run on low tire pressure on your cars? Or check it ever at all? We probably all should be, because in terms of running more efficiently, you got to be checking the tire pressure and changing your fuel filter a little bit, okay? And by that, I'm using that analogy because when you're thinking about changing over to a new diet, you want to think about those simple things that you can do, checking the tire pressure, checking your fuel filter, and those things are really key. Meal prep is one of those. How many of you make at least, I'm going to say, 1 meal per week at home? Okay, and keep the hands up there, keep the hands up there. How many of you make 3 meals a week at home? All right, awesome, wow. How many of you make 5 meals a week at home? You're losing a few people. How many of you make 15 meals, meaning like 5 days of breakfast, lunch, and dinner at home? Still a lot of you folks. So I don't even need to talk anymore. You guys have I just asked that because you're a real probably involved audience. You really take care of your bodies. You're being into it more, and maybe you live in a place where there's no vegetarian restaurant close by. You might not have a lot of options when it comes to grocery stores, so you've got to be planning your meals. But meal planning and taking time to make your own meals at home is one of the simplest things you can do as far as checking that fuel filter and checking the tire pressure. I think a big shift is changing. A lot of you are really good at it, and you're like improving in terms of making more meals at home, but we have been seeing a lot of decline in people actually making meals at home because A, it seems more expensive, B, it takes up time, and most of us are very busy, and C, people just have lost interest in it. So I want to keep bringing that back. I think it's one of the biggest things to not only eating a plant-based diet, but just eating better in general. And folks like Mark Bittman, Michael Pollan, they were one of their biggest things. If we can get more people in their own kitchens cooking their own food, it's probably just the key thing as far as winning the battle on some of the health issues we have with diet. This one is really key. So meal planning. Does anybody play with apps on their phone? Smartphones are everywhere these days. Grocery list apps. If those of you who have played with some of the meal planning apps, I'd highly recommend if you're somebody who likes technology, use these to your advantage. Because when you go to a grocery store, the last thing you want to do is just think willy-nilly, okay, what should I grab off the shelf? Or what am I hungry for? It's best to have a grocery list. It's best to have a menu plan of what you're going to be making the next week. So I think some of the apps, whether it's, there's a ton of them out there. I think I used Grocery IQ for a while and played with that one. But there's a lot of useful ones where they can kind of help you go through. Once you put in your typical grocery items, it's no longer a question, okay, what do I need in the produce aisle? What do I need to get from the bulk area? You can really streamline that with your meals that you have planned. Anybody do cook-offs? Like on a Sunday night, you cook for a few days during the week. You got any cook-off apps? All right, a bunch of you. This is one of the biggest things. I try to make a big salad once a week where I use that same salad, so when I get home I'm not chopping veggies for hours. Crock pots are great, slow cookers. My mom used to have one. I always wondered why we have one of those things, but they're coming back, and they're really useful. If you've got a busy family and work schedule, use a crock pot, especially in the hot weather that we're having coming up here in the summer. It's a great way. So doing cook-offs, cooking things in advance so they're ready when you get home. When the kids come home, you're feeling overwhelmed. The last thing most people want to do is cook for 2 hours straight. So simplifying that, streamlining it is really key versus going down and grabbing Domino's pizza or whatever fast food. And that's what a lot of people end up doing because they just haven't planned properly. I think having dinner days too. A lot of families, my mother was really big at, we're going to sit at this table for an hour every night. And of course, we didn't have all these fancy technology gizmos these days, like iPads and computers and such. But it was paramount. Like she's like, we fixed this meal for you guys, and eventually we had to be fixing it. So we had to sit down as a family an hour every night and eat. She's like, you can eat as fast as you want, but we're going to sit here as a family. So I think bringing that back is really key as far as community. And I love to cook for guests, and I think that community aspect, that social aspect, is something that we need to kind of bring back with food and diets. Okay, fun little photo here. This photo is my ankle after the Hard Rock 100. Remember that air cast a few slides back? That's what it looks like. And I brought this one back up again because before that race, I did 0 anti-inflammatories, no ibuprofen, no Tylenol. Here's what I did. Turmeric, bromelain, arnica, essential fatty acids like omega-3s, garlic, ginger, ice, compression, and vitamin C. And that's all I did. Now, a lot of people might say, well, gosh, did that take away the pain, Scott? And is that why you won and set a new course record? So, by the way, I don't want to ruin the spoiler alert for those who read the book. But I went out to win that race in a course record, 26 hours, 8 minutes, on a badly sprained ankle. And a lot of people say, well, did all those natural things take away the pain? Unfortunately not. Still felt every step of that ankle, but the key thing is it didn't slow down the healing process. So even 2 days out, I was pumping all this stuff in, drinking, basically rice milk, soy milk with turmeric in it. And that's the key thing. Ibuprofen and a lot of anti-inflammatories will take away some of the pain initially, but it lengthens out the healing process. So I think that's something we always want to take a pill these days. We want the quick fix. And sometimes the quick fix isn't the best as far as speedy recovery. So consider that the next time you sprain your ankle before you run 100 miles. And this is to show you, too, I did all natural remedies that you can pick up at any grocery store. And I think Hippocrates said it best when he said, let food be thy medicine. And that's a quote that has stuck with me for years. And really thinking about food as not only fuel, but really medicine. It's really how we should be treating it. And a lot of the ancient wisdom from Asia and China, from traditional native tribes, really centered around natural plants and things that they could find in nature. And I think we're seeing more and more resurgence of getting back to that. So when I look at my diet, the biggest thing I like to focus on is integration rather than elimination. So many people think about what foods they have to eliminate when they go to a new diet instead of the foods that they actually can integrate. So don't think about, I can't eat A, B, C, and D. Think about X, Y, and Z that you now can eat or that you should be eating. So a lot of people eliminate and then they end up with basically salad greens at a salad bar. No, I can't eat anything else. So try to think about where are you going to get your protein? Where are you going to get your carbohydrates? You might have to ask for a baked potato. I've eaten at steak joints, by the way, the night before races because I was stuck somewhere in the middle of Texas. And I ate at a steak joint the night before race, so it can be done. You ask for the baked potato side, you ask for veggies on the side with no butter, and you make sure you ask for some beans, maybe from the salad bar, kidney beans, or get a protein source that you bring with you. So totally can be done. Quantity is really key before thinking quality. A lot of athletes wonder, and a lot of active folks wonder why they don't have energy when they're trying to do the things athletically and to change to a plant-based diet, partly because they're not getting enough quantity. It's the beauty of a vegetarian plant-based diet. You can eat more food, and I think a lot of people would benefit from that in this country because we have to eat a lot of roughage and a lot of fiber when we're on a plant-based diet. Unless you're eating a lot of junk food. There's definitely junk food out there when it comes to plant-based. And then you can focus on quality. So focus on quantity first, and then quality, it's really about getting more of the good stuff. And if you transition to a plant-based diet, naturally, unless you're drinking Mountain Dew and eating Twinkies, you will be eating more good stuff. Okay, I wanted to show you, in a typical day for me, I can be eating close to 5,000 plus calories per day. And I know a lot of you probably won't be doing that, but this is living testament. This is when this is, by the way, a photo of me when I rode around the Alps in France. I did a 10-day tour from Geneva to Nice, France. And basically, I was eating, 5,000 plus calories a day because I was on a bicycle for 16 hours a day. And it totally can be done in a plant-based diet, even in the middle of France where cheese is king. And, of course, typically you have ham in your lentils there, too. Again, it's whole foods based. I try to do mostly whole foods, which means I end up cooking a lot, especially when I'm at home. 90% organic, and I'm a big fan of gardening, farmers markets. This is farmer market season. Get out there. You don't have to spend tons of money in natural food stores all the time. You have these great farmers markets, and make sure you seek those out. Typically, it's 50 to 60% carbohydrate based. Some of you might be surprised. Most people think of a vegan diet as 70, 80%. Well, when I'm doing these long events and needing to eat 5,000 calories, it's critical that I incorporate a little bit more fat. So this is why my carbohydrate content is a little bit lower. It's based around fruits, vegetables, whole grains, When I do breads, I prefer more the sprouted breads. So those of you who are familiar with Ezekiel 4:9 breads, manna bread, those are the breads that I'm talking about. When I travel, I don't get those necessarily, but at home I try to do more of the sprouted grain breads. Typically, they're a little higher in protein too, which is another benefit. Beans, lentils, really key part of my carbohydrate content. And when I do pasta, in fact, I'm a big, as you know, Polish is my heritage, and so it's fun to have some pierogies today. But when I do pasta, it's typically whole grain, except today when I have my pierogies. Fat. This is one that a lot of people ask about and are quite surprised, but as an athlete competing in these distances, I wouldn't get enough calories per day if I didn't bump up my fat content. So those of you who have had cardiovascular disease, who are having diabetes issues and transitioning to a diet, you may not want to be at this level of fat. But if you have an active lifestyle or you feel your energy is low on a plant-based diet, chances are you're not boosting this up there. And when you do, hopefully you're incorporating a lot of whole sources. This is kind of my list of really key fats. To get my omega-3s, I use a product called 7 Sources. I incorporate olives, olive oil, avocados, almond butter, some peanut butter occasionally, but I'm more of a fan of almond butter. Coconut oil. Anybody use coconut oil? I started to replace coconut oil a few years ago instead of frying things in olive oil. It's a higher heat oil, so I'd recommend saving your olive oil for things that you're not heating up too high. It's actually coming back as being okay. For a long time, saturated fats were kind of on the no-no list. Nuts and seeds, chia seeds, sesame oil, things like that. That's where I'm getting most of my fats. Protein, 15 to 20%. And again, this can be totally done on a diet that is 3,000 to 5,000 calories a day. I'm a big fan when I feel like I need a so-called veggie steak. Rather than most of the meat analogs and the meat substitutes, I prefer tempeh and tofu. Tempeh is actually 3 grams of protein to 1 gram of fat, a really good lean protein source. Lentils, edamame, another great one too. Again, it's a whole-based. Some people are afraid of soy. I'm not worried of growing breasts and some of the other things people are worried, especially guys have this problem like, oh, I don't want to eat too much soy. I've heard so much bad press about it. But we don't want to eat in the quantities that we traditionally have eaten meat, but they're perfectly safe. I think unless you have a soy allergy, I think it's a big issue. Look at all the cultures around the world have been consuming tempeh, tofu, miso, and been actually really healthy and some of the healthiest people around the planet. So I don't think they should be feared as much as individuals really tell them to be. Things like my protein powder that I put in my smoothies, I like to do a mix of brown rice and pea protein. I do a little bit of hemp. It's a little lower protein content, so most of it's coming from pea and brown rice, and that way you complement the amino acids there too. And then nuts and seeds, to a lesser extent. $100 to anybody who can name this famous ultra runner here. This guy, by the way, has been a vegetarian for I think 30 years. I didn't see anybody raise their hand, so I don't think they could guess. But Eric Clifton, he was one of my heroes, won almost all the major ultramarathons out there for a while, had the record for most 100-mile wins. He's been a long-time vegetarian, but look what he's eating post-race. Slice of pizza, M&Ms on top of a bagel with whipped cream, potato chips. So if you're going to eat this way, if you're going to eat like Eric and be a vegan vegetarian, you probably should supplement. So I try to incorporate my vitamins through whole foods and eating food. There's a few up here that I do note that I incorporate, but in general, food first. But if you're somebody who's not as paying close attention, you may want to do a multivitamin. You may want to look at your B12. That's something I try to get through nutritional yeast. Or I do B-complex, which has that in. Liquid iron I'm a big fan of that. It's a little easier on the stomach. It's from natural condensed food sources, plant sources. I do that because I'm at altitude right now, but most men and guys don't typically need to do that. Women, it's more of an issue with anemia. Calcium, zinc, antioxidants, probiotics, those are to a lesser extent. And I don't lose sleep if I don't take those things in, okay? So really it's these top 3 or 4 that I'd recommend that you take a look at if you think you're starting to be low energy, have some issues, maybe have some anemia going on.